The journey from your head to your heart is never easy, but it is the most important and fulfilling that you will ever embark on. It is the greatest adventure. Energy is how we show up, and it's what we're communicating to the world through our body language, through our words, and just our presence. And the way we connect to what we desire is to deep down know that it will happen at some point. If you feel you deserve it, it will happen at some point. When I talk about fulfillment, now we're talking about spiritual energy, because spiritual energy is about meaning and purpose. When you are doing something that makes you feel alive, when you are doing something that allows you to express your talent, your skills, and your potential, you experience this flow state. You're in flow, you just enjoy it. You can do the thing that you're doing for hours without realizing. This is what we call being high in spiritual energy. It's when you're fulfilled, it's where you are part of a bigger mission.
My guest today is someone who says that energy is everything. He says it's the fuel that drives your success and gives you the power to achieve your potential. And when managed well, it'll transform the way you live and work. Simon Alexander Ong is an international keynote speaker, best-selling author of Energize, and an award-winning coach featured in media such as the BBC, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Financial Times. In today's conversation, let's unpack how to create the kind of energy that supercharges you into a whole new level of clarity, focus, and vision. Simon, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So good to see you. And how are you today?
I'm feeling good. I had a good first quarter to the year so far, and now looking to build upon that as we move into the remainder of the year.
Amazing. So I've been following you for a while, and I somehow resonate with you. This book you've written called Energize. And I'm thinking, is this book from a business point of view? Is this book from a more kind of some people might say woo-woo point of view? But it's a very interesting topic to me, because as somebody who's been practicing yoga for at least a couple of decades, and longer without a teacher since I was the age of 12. And I've been studying up on all of the yogic philosophies and all kinds of other philosophies where prana, the idea of energy, is at the very, very center. So I wanted to start by asking you this question. So people can look at energy in very, very different ways. If you are talking to a physicist, they might define energy as the ability to create a certain amount of movement within a given time frame. As a yogi, if you asked me to define prana, I would say it simply means the subtle life force that permeates everyone and everything in the universe. Let's start by having your definition of what you mean by energy.
Well, the interesting thing is, you talk about physics, you talk about yoga. You can also look at Chinese culture, they call it qi. If you look at Maori culture, they call it mana. If you look at popular culture in the Star Wars film franchise, they call it the Force. Now, whatever label or description we use, we're actually all talking about the same thing, which is energy as a life force, energy as a way of how we move in our daily lives. And so the way I define energy is through 4 dimensions. It is your physical, it is your mental, your emotional, and your spiritual. In today's world, we focus exclusively on physical energy when we think about energy. Just go back to the beginning of the year and remember the sort of News resolutions you heard your friends and family mention. They may have said things such as, this is the year I want to improve my diet, or this is the year where my health and fitness is going to be my number 1 priority, or where I'm going to have a better balance between work and rest. All of that has to do with physical energy. But if we are to feel energized on a more regular and consistent basis, we also have to look at the mental, the emotional, and also the spiritual side of things.
So how do you define energy, though?
I think energy is simply the way you show up in life. It is a feeling that people get when they're in your presence. So when they enter your field, the energy that you emit can be felt. It's like a universal language that has no words, yet you and I feel it. Maya Angelou, I think, summed this up best when she said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. There's a saying that goes, energy introduces you before you even speak. And that's what I'm talking about. You might go into a room of people, 2 people come up to you, but 1 for whatever reason, attracts you to start a conversation with them, but you can't pinpoint what it is. There's just something about that person, and they haven't said a word yet.
Yeah.
This is energy. Energy is how we show up, and it's what we're communicating to the world through our body language, through our words, and just our presence.
Amazing. Yeah, I can completely relate to that you actually relate through your nervous system, almost your psychic senses, those unspoken senses that we're not necessarily putting into words, but you know whether someone is for you or not. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
As you mentioned, it's a very subtle thing. Energy is a very subtle thing. It's certainly very difficult to write an entire book about this one. So what led up to what in your life circumstances, what in your world led up to you writing about specifically energy, energizing?
There are 3 moments in the journey that come to mind that contributed to me writing about energy. The first is a story I share in the very first chapter of the book, where post the event of Lehman Brothers collapsing, and Lehman Brothers was the first job I had after graduation, I went into this hedge fund, which I thought was going to be a glamorous role and where I would be paid good money. But unfortunately, the reality was anything but. And so I was in early, I was last out of the office, long hours, punishing work. My health suffered in every way. I was sacrificing sleep, I survived on junk food, and I just didn't have time to exercise. And so I got to this point where I completely broke down one night. I said to my girlfriend at the time I would be taking the last train home after going to some client entertainment. I ended up coming home mid-morning, drunk, disoriented. And this was the catalyst for my girlfriend and I to have a deep conversation about where I was in my life and what was going on in my head. And up until that point, I'd never really seen the value of that, because I'd grown up with this assumption that as a man, I should be strong, I should just pick myself up, go again, and just toughen up, and not to share my feelings and emotions, and just to get on with it. And it was weak to do so. But my girlfriend at the time had given me this space to speak into. And it was very uncomfortable for me because I hadn't really done anything like that before. But just having her support gave me the reassurance that I had someone there to support me. So I quit that job soon after. I moved into another role still within the finance industry, but one that was kinder on the hours, so I could start making my health a priority. But that was the first moment that made me think about energy, because I was exhausted, I was tired, I was spent. I had no physical, mental, emotional, spiritual energy in play. The second was as I started building my business, speaking became a bigger thing of what I do. I was having this experience where a lot of people in the audience would come up to me after I came down from stage, and they would be saying to me, Simon, I loved what you said on stage. I loved your energy. And if I could have just a small percentage of the energy you have, I could go on and accomplish so much in my life and career. And that got me thinking about what led me to that point where I could show up on stage with a certain level of energy that would connect with the audience in the room. And the third was just through observation. I love reverse engineering success stories, so looking at individuals, teams, and companies that accomplish fantastic things and understand how they did it. And what I noticed is that those who were able to go the distance, do things most couldn't, was because they had the energy to do so. They had this ability to show up day after day after day as their best selves.
You shared in your book a quotation by, I think it was Satya Nadella, when he was addressing the people in, I think it maybe a university in India. And I made a note of it here. It's a really nice one where he talks about what a leader does is he shows up with his energy. What he brings to the equation is the energy that distinguishes him apart from somebody who's a follower, let's say, or somebody who's a manager. That was very interesting to kind of put that together.
I thought it was a great quote, because when you look at organizations, the most powerful energetic force is between those at the top and those that they lead. So if you work in a company and your boss comes in first thing on a Monday morning, before they've even said a word, you can tell whether they had a bad or a good weekend.
Yeah.
And that kind of sets up the energy for the day in the office. And this is why if leaders want to lead those around them effectively, they have to start by leading themselves. And it begins with managing their energy.
So when you talk about energy, managing your energy, we'll talk about that a little bit later, because you've got a good couple of chapters on various ways that you have recommended people do that. But just since we're talking about leadership, what would you say are perhaps the 3 key elements of a really good leader as opposed to a mediocre, somebody who's leading but who's not effective? What would you say the three key qualities in terms of managing their energy?
Sure. For the first one, I think it's awareness. If a leader is to manage their energy better, they have to be aware about their blind spots. What is working, what is not working. And for someone to be aware, they have to be open to feedback. And even though people give lip service to feedback, lots of us don't actually like to receive it. So if you can put it out there and actually be open to it, get people to give you feedback, bad or good feedback, because all feedback can be useful, then that gives you an idea of where you are right now and what must improve. And you have to be vulnerable in that. You have to be open to asking for help. A lot of people think, just as I did when I started in the financial industry, that you have to know everything as a leader. People don't actually want that. And so when you are vulnerable in a position of leadership, it doesn't make you any less of a leader. It simply makes you human. And I think that's what people crave, is that they want to look at their leaders and see a bit of them in this leader. They want to say, actually, the leader's like one of us. They have their own challenges. They have their own blind spots. And if we can help them, then we can all benefit from it. But if there's this distance, where it's them and us, then guess what? Yes, they might work for you, but they're not going to go the extra distance or the extra mile when it's needed, when the company or the team goes through some difficult times. But if the leader can be vulnerable to say, what are your thoughts? You know, we've gone through a good period. There's a challenging period coming up. I know what we must do, but there's some areas where I could need some of your input. And I know you will be stronger than me in some areas. And if you have any ideas, I would love to hear them. So I think the first thing is awareness. And that stems from being vulnerable and also having a level of humility that you don't know everything. Ego assumes you do. Humility knows that you can't know everything. So I think it's awareness. Second is listening. And it's not listening to respond, but it's listening to understand. And this is important because when you listen to understand, especially when you're working with a group of people or even big teams across different locations, when you listen to understand, it helps you communicate better. Warren Buffett even said that the greatest business skill that we can develop is the art of communication. But we can only communicate effectively if we know the best way to communicate. And when we can communicate effectively, we get heard. We get better engagement from the people that we are speaking to. So the second is to listen to understand so you can communicate more effectively. And the third, which I think is challenging, especially when you are an ambitious leader, is finding this rhythm between work and rest. It's not to see them as opposites, but as partners of the same team. Work and rest have to find this rhythm where, yes, you have periods of deep work, but there'll be moments also where you must pull back to have rest so you can come back reset and rejuvenated.
Interesting. Self-awareness, the ability to know when to stop and to balance recuperation and activity.
Yeah.
And being willing to listen. So look, the reality is, Simon, you know and I know, I've worked, my entire professional career has been in corporates, and as has my husband's, very, very senior levels. And what I've noticed is what you say is absolutely what I vibe with. Completely wish that was like that. And yet I know that the pressure of investors, I know the pressure to make every quarter, you know, make the numbers that you've declared. There's a whole range of reasons why somebody who runs a large organization, maybe from, I don't know, anything from 10 billion and the upwards, you know, I just don't see it happening. I see, in my personal experience, I have, and I myself have been somebody who's led teams across internationally and delivered into the boards of banks and large organizations, you know, IT projects, won large deals, delivered those, managed people. And one of the things that I know for sure is that there are actually few leaders who are so self-confident in their ability that they can be vulnerable enough to actually take on board feedback. And I think it's also challenging, isn't it, for them? Because on the one hand, they have been given a role where they've said they're going to accomplish a number of results. And they've said, I'm going to accomplish these results through these means. This is my strategy. So they need to go ahead and do that. Not everyone's going to like it. So that's the dichotomy that in the real world I see. How about you? You coach executives. What do you find in this area in terms of your challenge as a coach to really hone that message home?
Yeah, well, first of all, I relate to a lot of what you said, because when I work with executives and I have conversations with them and I talk in their organizations, what I notice is that so many of them attach their emotional well-being to results and outcomes.
Their identities tied with them.
Their identities tied to the result. And so let's say they hit their results in 1 year. Well, what are they focused on? Their focus now is on next year. They can never be in the present, because as soon as they hit one target, their mind is now looking to the future for the next target. And it's difficult, but the challenge for them and people in those situations is to not tie your emotional well-being to the results and outcomes, because those things in many cases are out of your control. There are external factors that you simply cannot account for in your plans and your strategies. But instead, it is to tie your emotional well-being to what is in your control. How you show up, how you relate, how you connect with other people. That is what is in your control. If you tie your identity and your emotional well-being to something outside of your control, like outcomes and results, guess what? Your identity changes who you are. You become someone who has lost themselves in this endless cycle, in this rat race that you can never win. And I remember when I was speaking in Dubai, I was talking with Marshall Goldsmith, and he was sharing with me some of the people he worked with. And he told me that when Michael Phelps retired from swimming at the Olympics, one of the first thoughts he had in that first year of retirement was about committing suicide, because he didn't know who he was anymore. He had spent so many years training for the Olympic Games. He spent so many years focused on being a swimmer that competed at the highest level. That was his identity. And his emotional well-being was tied to the number of gold medals that he could win. Now, when he finishes doing that as a career, what is his objective now? What is his goal? He's got nothing to tie his emotional well-being to. His identity becomes lost. And so I do resonate with what you're saying there, is because so many of us have grown up in the corporate world with having to tie success and our emotional well-being to outcomes and results. But I think it is slowly changing. When I started in the financial industry, if I were to have suggested to HR or even my manager that we should have a well-being committee, I think I would have been laughed at. They would have questioned what I was drinking or eating. But now there are many companies in the world that have their own well-being committees that are putting initiatives together or programs to make well-being a central focus of their employees. Now, it might not work for every organization, and they might not have got the results they have wanted yet, but just the fact that they are now open to different perspectives and thought, I think is a good first step.
It's interesting you say that things are slowly changing. I think from what I see myself as a coach, also the experience of having worked in these organizations and having gone through my own self-discovery transformational journey, led programs to people to, of transformation. One of the things is the first point that you mentioned earlier about self-awareness. The thing about self-awareness is that it needs you to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the first step is the pitfall for most people, because being honest with yourself means actually looking at your point of view, the way you've come to today in the success you might have had may very well be because you've used certain strategies for success to get you there. And they may not be the strategies that are serving you, but they get you the results. So it's just that self-awareness for all of us, whether you're a leader in a corporate or otherwise, is a fundamental a fundamental step and a fundamental sort of willingness, commitment, if you want to transform. So would you say that perhaps the game of self-awareness, self-discovery, transformation is perhaps not for everybody? They need to be ready to embrace that?
Yeah, you do have to be ready. I mean, there's this saying that goes, you can't change someone that doesn't want to be changed. And so there is an element of someone being open and willing to change. But the more that people talk about it, the more that people suggest people to look for coaches, mentors, and to do activities that will help gain a deeper understanding about who they are, I think the better. Because if only one or two people say it, we're not going to listen. But some of the people I work with, they are founders of startup companies. Some are doing very well. And some CEOs I'm working with, they were, in some cases, suggested to explore coaching from an investor. Or another CEO friend said, oh, I've had some coaching for a while, you should explore it as well. And that led to them and I having conversations. So I think the more that we can see and hear about the impact working on your soft skills can have, the more people start to question how they can incorporate that in their daily lives.
They're not so soft though, are they?
They're not, but the thing is, they are seen as soft.
Yeah.
And what I've come to realize as well, not just for myself, but also the people I work with, is that we need those soft skills in order to do the hard problems in life. Because business, whatever you're operating, whether you have a product or a service-based business, it is fundamentally all about people. And your ability to connect, to manage, and to lead people will determine how much success you have in the long term.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. In your book, you actually talk about focusing on what matters most. And there's a whole chapter you've given to that. And you coined a term, which I really like. It's called question storming. So what is question storming, and how is question storming different from brainstorming? And when is question storming most useful?
So first of all, the difference. Brainstorming is when you get a group of people together and you come up with solutions to a problem. You throw ideas into the middle of the table, you get everyone to contribute, and then you decide which of those ideas do you go on and pursue. That's brainstorming. It's focused on solutions. Question storming is focused on questions. What are the questions that we want to try and answer? And for me, the reason why question storming is more productive is, firstly, it means that we are all equal. If you have a question, whatever your level in the organization, you can ask it. This is a chance to put all of your questions into the middle. So it doesn't put people off asking a question. So any question you have, let's put it into the middle. And also the difference between question storming and brainstorming is that a single question can create a wealth of insight. Questions are like the keys to unlock the right path to where you want to be. And so if you question storm, put it in the middle, people could spot the right question at the right moment that unlocks their creativity. And for me, question storming is best right at the beginning. Because before you jump into a project, before you overcommit to something, it allows you to perhaps explore things you didn't think about just because somebody asked a question and you didn't think about that. So it forces you to go back and reflect about what additional information the team needs in order for people to have greater clarity as to the next step.
I love that. I really, really appreciate that, because I've noticed that, the extent to which your life is amazing is the extent to which you're able to ask the right questions of yourself, of the universe, because without asking that question, without asking for the right thing, you're not actually going to get anything new. And so I actually love that. I'm surprised I haven't heard that somewhere else before. So
it's
congratulations on that.
I'll give you an example. So I was talking with a new client recently, and he said one of his biggest challenges is prioritization. Because when you are an ambitious individual, there are lots of things you want to do. And so you end up saying yes to many things, some of which in hindsight you regret because you wish you had said no. Because at the time you said yes, you didn't think in a few weeks' time you would have packed up your diary. And so one question I said to him is, if you only had 2 hours a week to focus on your business, how would you use those 2 hours? And immediately that forced his mind to focus on what mattered most. He said, actually, if I only had 2 hours, I would go out and meet as many interesting people as I could, because some of my best opportunities have come from conversation, have come from me sharing with other people in my industry or people outside of my industry who are doing amazing things, what I'm up to and what my challenges are. And from those conversations, they've said to me, actually, you should speak to my friend, or you should speak to this person when you travel to this city. So that's how I would spend my 2 hours if I only had those 2 hours a week.
You do that a lot, don't you? You actually network. I've noticed you tend to be a big believer of making connections, networking. And now it sounds like obvious, but actually knowing that, many of us don't manage to actually make the time and find the opportunity, the right places to go to.
Yeah, when we talk about habits, in my book, I talk a lot about lifestyle habits because it's about energy. When I think about business habits, one of the most important business habits you can embrace if you want to succeed long term is every week, look at how you can expand, nurture, and develop your network. Don't rest on it. It has to be one of your top priorities. I focused on this right at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. I still focus on it today. And the value of a network is not how many people you know. I mean, yes, that is important to some extent as you build an audience, but it's how you can add value to that network. That's the real measure of your network. Can you connect people together? Can you introduce people to an opportunity? Can you refer someone to someone else? Can you bring 2 people together to kickstart a collaboration? If you can add value to that network, that's how people want to be part of your business. They want to be in your circle and they want to give you something back over time because you then become seen as a person of value. And for me, it's never been more important, especially when you think about today that there are so many people doing what you are doing. It's a combination of what you know and who you know. If you can get both in place, you've got a greater chance to succeed.
I really like that. That's absolutely, if there was one thing I think that many of us could do more of is to actually create a network in which you're adding value. And I think that's something I'm going to take on, Simon.
And what's also important actually when you think about network, and I think some people get this wrong, is that when you think about a network, what you want to also be thinking about is how can you have diversity in your network? Because if you want to stand out in the world of business and even leadership to some extent, you want to be thinking different. You want to be acting bold and original. And the only way to do that is to have diversity in your network. If you only hang out with the same people doing the same work as you, it is impossible to think different. But if you start deliberately spending time with people outside of your industry, which was one of the things I focused on early in my career, I would go out and I would spend time with anyone from film directors to musicians to chefs to bartenders to tech entrepreneurs to investors. What happens is you get all of these insights that are different from the average person in your industry. First, you think, well, how can I take what they're doing and apply it to what I'm doing in my field? And second, is there a way we can collaborate to put together something so unique that people can't help but talk about it?
Amazing. I really, really appreciate that. That's a really valuable, adding value to this podcast. It's really worth noting actually, and actually putting in as a thing to practice, to take on. I'm particularly bad at it because I get very busy with writing, creating content. I travel quite a bit, which is great, other responsibilities and so on. And I find that the thing that suffers the most is going out and meeting new people.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the secret sources behind the marketing of my book. I did an interview recently where someone said, Simon, I followed your book journey and I was in awe of your book marketing, how you got it out into the world and just the unique ways you shared it with the audience. So we did stuff such as the Connaught Hotel in Mayfair, designing the Energize cocktail. So if you went to that bar during the first few weeks of the book's publication and you ordered the Energize cocktail, not only would they bring out a trolley and they'll mix the drink for you, but when they present it on your table, they would do so on top of a copy of my book, a signed copy of my book for the drinker.
Amazing. And
so people would take photos and videos of that experience and share it onto social media. And then we did one of the world's first book launches in the metaverse. So if you put on your virtual reality headsets, you could then join me in this virtual conference room where my avatar would be talking to you, even though I was at home in my living room. And people could experience this unique environment that had never been done before.
That is so unique. How
so
did that come about?
So these came about through my network. So in my network, I knew a guy called Agostino Peroni, who heads up the bar at the Connaught Hotel in Mayfair. He's an icon within his industry. He's accomplished some amazing things. And so we struck up a friendship over the years, and then we put it out there as to what we could do as a collaboration. And it wasn't until the book was due to be published. And I said, how about we do something for the book? And that's when the idea came about. For the metaverse, it was through an investor who had invested in this company who was building education platforms in the metaverse. And he said, Simon, how about we design this platform for you in exchange for you marketing it to your audience? And we could do something special for the book. So that came from having a diversified network. And that's what I mean by adding that as a layer of your network. And how can you start to broaden the people that you connect with? Because what that does, it feeds your creativity, but it also helps you think different and start collaborations that other people would look at and go, wow. In marketing, they call this a UTP, which stands for unique talking points. How do you turn your audience into your marketers so you don't have to pay a marketing team?
Amazing. That's absolutely so cool. So cool. So that came about from the question about question storming. But to figure out what matters most to people, you advise people to ask themselves these 4 questions. And I'm going to read the 4 questions to you. The first one is, what does success mean to you? The second one is, what does fulfillment look like to you? The third is, what sort of impact do you want your life to have? The fourth question is, what would you do if money were no object? So those are the 4 questions you say to people. If you want to really you should get clear about these things, because that'll help you to focus on what matters most to you. So can you talk about the difference between success and fulfillment when it comes to experiencing these in yourself energetically?
Sure. So I'll share it in the context of my experience. So on paper, at the beginning of my career, I would be deemed as successful. Simon went to the London School of Economics. Simon graduated. He studied at Lehman Brothers, a well-known American investment bank. He went to a hedge fund, earned a decent pay packet, got good bonus. On paper, Simon is successful. And that would have been the definition for most of society and my family. But inside, I didn't feel successful. And this is where fulfillment comes in. You could look successful, but you can be successful in something you hate. I was lacking fulfillment. I didn't feel that I could be in this industry for a long time. I remember in every job I had before I quit to start entrepreneurship, there were moments of my day where I would retire into the toilet cubicle and just close my eyes, resting my head on the side of the cubicle, dreaming of a different life. That for me is the difference between success and fulfillment. You could be seen to be successful, but the very thing you're successful in could be something that just does not align with who you are.
I think people are successful often because that's who they are. They work at whatever they've got at hand.
Absolutely.
And they give it their best because that's what they're doing. And so from that point of view, we can get success. It may not necessarily be the thing that...
We're running someone else's race.
Yeah,
and so when I talk about fulfillment, now we're talking about spiritual energy, because spiritual energy is about meaning and purpose. When you are doing something that makes you feel alive, when you are doing something that allows you to express your talent, your skills, and your potential, you experience this flow state. You're in flow. You just enjoy it. You can do the thing that you're doing for hours without realizing. This is what we call being high in spiritual energy. It's when you're fulfilled. It's where you are part of a bigger mission. But when you're low on spiritual energy, that's when you're going against who you are. You're not doing the things that allow you to express your gifts. And the way that manifests itself is through physical tension. So this is why people who hate their jobs, on Sunday nights or Monday mornings, they have this feeling of physical tension inside their stomachs. And that is because your body, your spirit knows that the thing you're about to do is not what you were meant to do. Our body knows, deep down we also know. But it's about having the courage to face that and to understand that we have to make some change.
the nervous system is so correlated with higher consciousness beyond the mind, beyond the identity.
Yeah.
And that's always, I talk about it a lot in my books. It's we in Vedic terminology, we would call it Atman, which is, or Brahman, which is, Atman is higher consciousness. That is the field, they call it the unified field in physics. You could say, Deepak Chopra often talks about field of pure potentiality. It's constantly giving us the information that would be useful to us. If only we had, I find it's about tuning your nervous system. So it's like, attuning yourself. Yeah. What does that mean? It means, sort of like really allowing the nervous system to become capable of receiving that and interacting with that field. So when we talk about energy, I feel like that's a lot of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And this is why in my book, I talk about how our thoughts create our reality, that we are both the sculpture and the sculptor. It's that there is no one reality for all of us. The way we interpret the experience we have of the world, that creates our reality. And so what that means is that at any given moment, we have the power to choose one thought over another. And when we choose a different thought, that completely rewires our experience of reality. So we think a different thought, that creates a different action creates a different result, and that different result either affirms a new belief or it gives us the motivation to do something better, to do something more than we did yesterday. And so when we realize that we can choose our own thoughts and we can interpret reality in however we want, then we literally become our own creator of our future.
Are you someone who is more mentally inclined, or are you someone who's more spiritually inclined when it comes to which thoughts you allow to turn into your next reality? As in, I see one as being something which is related to what we already know. Yeah. And the other is from that field of creation, pure potential. And it's like if something happens, it's something crops up in your awareness that may not have been there. How does that work for you?
So simplest way to put it is something I learned from Zen Buddhism when I spent some time in Japan. So I used to go Japan every year for a couple of years before I became a father. And I remember learning this statement from one of the temples I visited, where it said, be attached to no outcome and open to everything. And so that's how I kind of go about things. I'm attached to no outcome and open to everything, yet I'm operating from the identity of my future self. So I think where people face challenges in the present is when they're making choices and decisions based on their past self.
Exactly.
So they end up repeating the cycles of their past self.
And that's where the questions come from.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's where the stuckness is, because there's nothing fresh coming through. They get
stuck. There's no allowance for fresh insight. But what I do, and this is what I share in the chapter, What Matters Most, is you have to look ahead in time and get some clarity as to who you want to be. So really connect with that person. It could be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but just pick a moment in the future where life is exactly where you would like it to be and you are the person you want to be. And then from that point in time, transfer that future self to the present moment and act from that future self to make today's decisions. Because what happens is there is no more dilemma. There is no more indecision. Because if you're operating from that future identity, you already know what those choices and habits are for you to embrace.
And I think for some people that might be a dilemma, because operating from the future self, what if that future self is one that loves peace, being present, and the activity of success and accomplishment and everything else suddenly becomes, a thing to do as opposed to a way to be, because you're already experiencing yourself in that state of fulfillment, right? So there is no future self. That becomes the now self. It's like, this is how it is.
Absolutely. And this is how we create wormholes. In physics, a wormhole is how you get from one point to another point almost instantaneously. This is how we do it for us, is we bring back that future self to today. We act as if we already are that future self. So we come from a place of being, not doing. How are we being as that future self? And then when you come from a place of being, everything seems to fall into place, because how you show up, how you see yourself, how you connect with other people is from that future identity. And you accelerate far quicker than most ever will.
So it actually can take you to whatever it is that your soul, your higher self, whatever your purpose for taking birth in this lifetime is, and to actually fulfill on that, as opposed to, it can come faster. I think sometimes the challenge, I'm thinking from people that I've coached, people who are really working on this idea of being fulfilled now, to let go of the identity that they know themselves to be, because that's so strong. That's the ego. It wants to hold on to everything. It doesn't know anything different. There's fear around being different. And so, and then there are, of course, all these conversations around culture, what you've been brought up with, other people's expectations. You can still arrive in a place where you think, okay, I'm now at a stage where I'm not really bothered by what other people think of me. I only have a short time here. And what am I going to do with that time to make it truly, like, how can I honor my word to my higher self, to my soul, that I will accomplish before I take my last breath, whatever my mission was that I came here to do. It doesn't have to be like a saving the world type mission. It could just be becoming a higher version of yourself. It could be resolving a particular issue. So my question around this, more an inquiry with you, Simon, because we're talking about the future, feeling fulfilled. The inquiry is around, you don't really want to do the things that you've always done, pursued, the goals you've pursued, the things that you had as top of your core values. They seem to shift a lot.
They do. And they must shift if you are going to become the person you want to be, because we evolve. Every moment that you work on yourself, you open your mind up to new knowledge, new experiences, new insight. So that is part of the evolution. You can't be the same person you were yesterday if you are evolving every single day. And so when you look at the future and who you want to become, it is, and this is where you have to accept this as being part of the process, it is going to cost you your old self. And when you can find peace with that, you can focus on molding the person you want to be.
Indeed. I think it's a really, really important point to embrace and contemplate, because the reason why I feel a lot of us don't have that sense of fulfillment and being true to ourselves, like leading life from being true to not the self, the identity, but the self, which is the one beyond the identity, which is pure potentiality.
Pure potentiality is what it's about. And this is funny enough. This is what Bronnie Ware wrote about in her book, The Top Regrets of the Dying. The number one regret amongst the dying was, I wish I lived a life more true to myself than a life lived for others. And so if we can focus our energy and attention on living a life more true to ourselves, of understanding who we really are, because if we want greater wisdom, it begins with knowing yourself. So as you begin to know yourself for who you truly are, that's when life begins. Indeed.
I mean, for myself, I completely embrace that. I I have compassion for the fact that there's a lot of resistance that can come up when the higher you approaches you, and you can get a glimpse of that, even through even just a few moments of silence, and there's a little crack in the thoughts, and then suddenly it captures you. What happens is, like, the self, wherever you might be, I think it's not a static journey. It's like, there's this fluid spiral, so you may have overcome a certain amount of resistance when the last time it happened, but the next time it happens, it might come and get you anyway. So I have compassion for the journey, for the self-discovery journey with a capital S.
It's never easy. I mean, the journey from your head to your heart is never easy, but it is the most important and fulfilling that you will ever embark on. It is the greatest adventure. I mean, would you want to go through life having never discovered who you truly are and who your potential is? Or would you rather have explored it? Yes, failed. Yes, faced some hard times, but you became closer to who you were meant to be.
Absolutely. That really great inquiry. I love having these conversations with people who are deeply, engrossed in their own evolution. Because there is nowhere you can't go and learn this kind of stuff. You can't do a class on it or anything.
No.
It can only come from personal experience. This leads me to thinking about the paradox, the dichotomy of wanting something and being fulfilled without that thing. So meaning that when you want something, you're so much in the energy, the vibration of the desiring of it. It's like, I want this. I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be that person. That it can take you right out of being in the moment here and now and appreciating who you are and what you have right now. So being satisfied, fulfilled in the present moment because you're chasing something. So how do you bridge the desire, the feeling of lacking that thing that you're wanting because you don't have it right now, but you are wanting it? The attachment that comes with wanting something. Sometimes you want something so much. I was listening to somebody the other day. I think I was listening to a podcast and the guest was talking about how she was so absolutely obsessed with her business that it was literally beginning to cost her life. She was so attached to the success of her business. Yeah. And this is kind of human, right? It happens when people want something so much.
And this is how people go through the motions of depression and anxiety, because they are attaching their well-being to a future that may or may not happen. It could be getting a promotion. It could be getting that dream job you've always wanted. It could be moving cross-country. It could be getting that man or woman you want in your life. These things are what we tend to attach our emotional well-being to. And if we don't get it, if it doesn't happen, then we go off the rails. We find something to soothe our pain in that moment. But what's more important is that the future, yes, we can do the right things to make it happen, but we shouldn't attach ourselves to it. If we find peace with focusing what we can control, then we become empowered to take some level of action. And the way we connect to what we desire is to deep down know that it will happen at some point. If you feel you deserve it, it will happen at some point. And then focus your energy on the present. What can I do today that will increase the probability of that thing happening? And then just leave the rest to the universe. Because what happens is when you overthink it, when you focus too much on the outcome, you give up too soon. Yeah. And lots of people do. They start something with these big hopes and dreams, and they're not consistent because they become impatient, and 6 months, 7 months down the line, they're not seeing results and they give up. Whereas if they just stayed on the journey a few months longer, they might have been open to that hockey stick growth where things start coming in like an avalanche. And so what I try and do myself now is focus on rewarding myself for the execution of the process, not the accomplishment of the outcome. Because the old me would have said, when I hit this target, when my book becomes a bestseller, when I hit these objectives, then I will celebrate. But what happens is that if you are only rewarding the outcome, you will never get out of that cycle. You're always going to prioritize and put on a pedestal the outcome. But if you focus on rewarding yourself for having executed the process, then guess what? You're going to be more motivated to continue with that process. And so it's just about reframing what we reward and the relationship we have with future outcomes and the current situation we have.
Enjoying the journey, really celebrating the journey. And also the thing that you mentioned about attachment, I think is really key. But that's the dichotomy, isn't it? When you want something, there is a tendency to almost become obsessive with it or become obsessive with it. And then what does that mean? That means you're really attached to it.
Yeah.
But then finding that balance between the goal, the vision, and at the same time, trusting the universe. It's like trusting is the big thing here.
It is tough because we don't know the future. We don't know if the decisions we're about to take today are going to open the path to where we want to be. So there is certainly a degree of trust that has to go into it. And also self-belief. You have to believe to some degree that you have value to offer the world, that you have something that is going to help you get to where you want to be. There are two sales that occur all the time. The second is selling you to others, and the first is selling you to you. And unless you can sell you to you, it is always going to be a challenge to sell you to others. And this is why there's a combination here of inner work and outer work. And it always starts with the inner work. Because if you spend enough time working on you, the outside stuff becomes a lot easier.
How do you spot somebody who's aligned internally and externally in that way?
Presence. You can tell by their presence, how they carry themselves, how they speak, and the way they interact with people, and also how they deal with tough situations. You can see someone who is aligned in that way. I remember when I spoke at an event last year in June 2023 with Deepak Chopra. So I was speaking before Deepak, I spoke, there was a break, and then Deepak came onto stage. And in that break, I had a chance to connect with Deepak. And his presence was incredible. He was absolutely in the moment, listening to you, hearing your questions, and answering it from his experience. And you can tell he's done a lot of work on himself and that he's operating at a high level of consciousness.
Nice. Like that. No, it's very true. Now, Simon, in everyone's life, there's always that one traumatic situation that happens, right? Which, say, usually there are more than one, but there's at least one that happens where it shapes your view of life, shapes a view of yourself, and especially what's possible in your life coming up. So usually that happens in childhood, something like that. In your book, I saw one incident you mentioned where you failed a year at university. I think you failed 3 out of 4 courses. Was that correct?
It was a proper failure. three Fs out of 4 exams. I mean, I just needed one more and it would have been a clean sweep. But it was complete failure. And I had to resit that year. I was just dreading the conversation with my dad.
I saw that.
As soon as I saw the results.
I so resonated with that. I've been there, done it, got the T-shirt. Yeah.
I was frozen in front of the computer screen looking at the results because I knew I would have to go downstairs and tell everyone what had just happened. There was no avoiding it. I had to share that. And it was so hard at the time. I thought I had thrown away my future. I thought that I could never create the life I wanted to have.
Chinese culture, right?
Chinese
like the
culture.
Indian culture.
It's very focused on academics.
Oh, yeah.
And what would I do now? But that traumatic experience shaped me in the same way, I guess, losing my mum did and going through a tough family situation when I was younger shaped me as well. But this particular moment of failing that year of university and having to resit it shaped me in the sense that it taught me the power of relationships, but also being responsible for your future. Because in the following year, when everybody was applying for internships at the companies they wanted to work for, I couldn't do it the normal way. The normal way was you go into a company's website, you fill in an application form, and on the first page, they ask you for your exam results of the previous year. And that's the first filter. I couldn't get past the first filter. You fill in those exam results, the computer then tells you whether you've passed that first round, and then you have to fill in the other details before you submit the application.
Yeah.
But I couldn't fill in even that first page. So I had no choice in that next year after I resat that year, but to go to company conferences and to build relationships with as many people as I could so that I could just send them my CV and they would say things such as, "Hey, Simon, I will forward your CV onto HR and let's get you in for an interview." So I was able to bypass some of these application forms and go direct to people working in the company already to get an interview, because I knew that if I could get into that interview, I could show them what I could do.
Yeah, they would love you. I do resonate with that. I don't actually have a degree. I chose to to get straight into corporate.
Yeah.
The opportunity came up. I thought I was going to do it for a year. And I ended up buying a house at the end of that year because I did so well in the first year. And what happened was that later on, I wanted to move into IT. And Indian IT was starting to buzz a little bit in tiny little scraps of newspaper articles in Indian newspapers when I was traveling around Delhi and stuff. I'm like, what is this thing? I really want to do this. I just knew instinctively I could do it. And it was business development, sales, developing relationships. And I mean, just no way that I could fail at that. I just knew it. Except for the fact that when I came back home here, I was looking for a job in this area. The companies were not set up here. And then I came across one ad in the Sunday Times and it was for this type of role. It was a very I didn't know how big or small the company was. Turned out it were 150 people. It was a startup. And they wanted somebody with 5 years of software sales experience.
Wow.
I mean, there's just no way I didn't have, I had technology, but not software. So, and they wanted a degree, some sort of an engineering or an MBA, and possibly even a PhD. That was the kind of level that they were looking at. And I'm like, no, I don't care. I got in touch with them, and I literally, it took me 6 months to get the job, and there were like 200 people ahead of me. I got the job, and I spent 15 years in that industry. The biggest deal I won was $1 billion.
And you know what that tells me? What we've just spoken about there is not enough people pick up the phone, call people, or reach out and message people. If you just ask, if you put yourself out there, you never know what could be possible.
It's about relationships at the end of the day, isn't it? And I think the challenge that what I hear people tell me today when I'm talking to younger people wanting to leave, leaving university, wanting to apply, or just sort of in that sort of space, is because everything is so digitalized now, and they don't even know whom to contact. And it does take a certain type of a research to get to that. People are not used to being approached. It's kind of like a complete no-no. Whereas I know back in the day when I was doing these things, it was you could pick up the phone and ask to speak to somebody.
I think you just have to be clever nowadays. And when I talk about energy, I think one of the ways that we can feel energized in doing something such as how to get a job or how to get a collaboration or how to reach out to someone is to gamify the process. Treat the whole thing as a game. If you were to treat it as a game, how would the action you're about to do work if it was more fun? If it was more fun to do, what would that look like? And so for me, it came down to attention. I knew that if you could get people's attention, then they would be open to hearing what you had to offer. In the world of digital, I think that actually makes things a little easier, because even though you can't pick up the phone and call someone because not everyone shares their numbers, and it's hard to get a number as it was perhaps back in the day, what you can do now is do things a little different. Instead of just sending a text or an email, drop a voice note, drop a video message, do something that makes you stand out. Because it will easily get you ahead of the people that would just do the obvious thing. Do something different and you get their attention. Then they want to look at your profile. Then they want to find out more about you. And that's how you start a conversation. Absolutely.
I completely resonate with that. So you could have written a book about charisma, but you didn't. You wrote a book about energy. That's what you're talking about is, in a sense, some aspect of charisma, but it doesn't have to be that elusive, I think, to make a difference because I think when you presenting yourself.
When you work on your own energy, again, we're talking physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. When you work on your own energy, you show up differently. And this is how charisma is born. Charisma is born because of your presence. Now, your presence can only be a certain level when you're happy with yourself, when you're confident with who you are, and you believe you have value to offer to the world. Now, if those things are in place, guess what? The way you walk into a room will be far different to someone who walks into the room without that foundation in place. Charisma is a natural byproduct, and presence is a natural byproduct of you working on your own energy.
Definitely agree with you on that one. Definitely agree with you on that one. And so when we talk about success, Simon, it's one of these things which I noticed that, some of us are geared towards accomplishment, success, achievement, even from our backgrounds, whether it's Indian, Chinese, and any background. And then there are those people who are not. It seems to me that in my observation, like in terms of, I kind of put them in three buckets, three different groups of people. There are those who, when they hit adversity, they get up and they challenge it and they overcome it. So it's like when the going gets tough, the tough get going. The second group actually don't have that reflex. They don't have that reflex. They tend to more give up over time, or they don't have the grit or the ambition. I don't know which one of the three. Sometimes it varies. Don't know grit, ambition, or give up. And obviously, when you don't get the results you want, you start to form an idea about what's possible for you in life, maybe like, this is not for me. And then they become the followers of those people who are the tough ones. And then there's a third type who, in the face of adversity, they decided early on that they're not cut out for success and they're okay with that. They might innately lack motivation or ambition altogether. They settle for something and they can be happy within that settling.
Sure.
So I think it's fair to understand that there are different people. Not everybody cares for... Success is not a key value for everyone. Achievement, accomplishment is for many of us. So what's the difference between motivation, ambition, and energy as you're talking about it?
Sure. So motivation, first of all, is something that has to be renewed. Motivation is like a push force when you think about energy. If you think about it from a physical perspective, it's a push force. I need to feel motivated in order to do something. So something has to push you in order to take action. And this is the difference, I think, between motivation and inspiration. Motivation, you read a book, you go to a seminar, and you get a shot. It's like an energy shot into the system. And then you might go for a few more days or a couple of weeks and you need another shot. This is motivation. It's constantly having to push yourself. Inspiration for me is more of like a pulling force. And this is where energy becomes interesting. Because if you have a compelling and a magnetic vision of where you want to be in life, then what happens is that just pulls you forward. It has a charge on it. It's the moments where you find yourself waking up early in the morning to do something with the smell of possibilities without requiring motivation. You just get up and you do it. The best way to explain this is if you've booked a 2-week holiday to somewhere exotic and it's a lovely resort, the day before, even though you know you have to wake up early to catch the taxi to the airport, you do it. You do it because that visual of where you want to be is just pulling you forward effortlessly. You don't have to motivate yourself. But try waking up early in a dark morning during the winter season, doing a job you hate. You need motivation. It's very different. And so that's the energetic difference, I think, between motivation and inspiration. One is more of a push that you need again and again and again, and the other is more of a pull. It has a magnetic charge to it that just continually pulls you forward. And that's why, for me, it's important to begin with the end in mind. You know, we talked just now about success being in different guises for people. But the most important thing when it comes to success is to know what it means for you. What does success mean for you? Don't care about what other people's definitions are, but what is it for you? And it can be something as simple as, I want to be a great housewife or husband. I want to exit a business. I want to have an impact in the world. I want to move to a different country and make a success of it. I want to be promoted to managing director of a company. Now, as long as you are clear on what that is for you, that's the best starting point, because then you can decide what the actions are going to be today that will help make that possible for you.
Interesting. And I noticed that when I talked about motivation, I talked about motivation and ambition.
Yeah.
You responded with motivation and inspiration, which is actually very, very interesting to me, because what it tells me is that, in fact, ambition in some ways is a form of inspiration for some people, and yet, and it can be a driving force.
I think also the reason I probably didn't mention ambition is because if you want to be better than who you were yesterday, if you want a better life, you are already ambitious. Ambition is part of your DNA.
Yeah.
Because we're not meant to live a life where we just coast and we kill our potential and we let our dreams wither on the side. Life is given to us to experience in its entirety. It's a miracle of life. Not everyone gets the gift of experiencing life in all of its forms. But you have been given this opportunity to live life. And so if you are wanting to develop yourself, if you are keen on being better than who you were yesterday, if you feel there is more, you are ambitious. So for me, we all have ambition at different degrees.
I agree. I think ambition is just something which is innately there. Yeah. And it's there to in varying sort of levels of existence in individuals. We may not articulate ambition in some cases if it's not related to a career or to acquiring or to getting into a relationship or something. We don't think about it that way, but we do resonate very much more with inspiration because it's an inner feeling. It's a more pleasant, it makes us feel good.
Absolutely. Inspiration is, I think, what keeps you going on the tough days. And you are going to have tough days. It's inevitable. When you are embarking on a path of growth, You are going to face challenges. And the ultimate factor that determines how far you progress is how you respond to those. In your response lies your greatest power, but how you choose to respond to that is entirely up to you.
Interesting. And you were mentioning in your book about managing energy. You were talking about managing energy. You actually did an exercise, which is what we call in yoga nidra. What are the most effective ways of supercharging your energy? And in particular, I wanted to talk about energy zappers as well on the other side of that. So there are people and things that zap your energy. But let's talk about what do you consider to be energy superchargers?
Superchargers, well, the first thing is movement. Really essential, I think, if you want to get energized quickly. For me, it is one of those habits that has been the domino effect in motion. So as soon as I made daily movement a priority, a non-negotiable, that inspired me to then want to change my diet. It then made me want to explore different avenues out of the corporate world that I was in. But it was moving my body on a regular basis that put my mind in the mental state required to make better choices. So that would be the first thing that comes to my mind. The second would be to expose yourself to negative ions. Now, negative ions are things that we find in nature, close to sources of water like rivers and oceans and sea. Expose yourself to negative ions because that can do wonders for both your mental and physical state.
I actually drink reverse osmosis water, which has negative ions. It actually puts back in negative ions that get stripped in the process of, or at the plant.
Yeah. And I think we underestimate the power of just going outdoors, disconnected, walk outdoors, under sunlight, in nature, in these environments. So those would be the two quick things I think that we can do now.
Nice. I think with regards to the movement thing, what I've discovered is people are often, so many people struggle with losing weight, staying fit and so on. And one of the things that I feel like no one is talking about is you've got to find your mode of what makes you feel good when you move. It's not always the gym. If the gym...
And this is also the reason why people don't have consistency in movement, because they think if I don't go to the gym for 1 hour and do all the things that other people are doing, then what's the point of doing it? Exactly. I might as well not do it. But movement is different for all of us. For some of us, it could be doing an intense gym workout. For others, it could be going for a swim, going on your bike, walking in nature. You just got to find what makes it fun for you.
Totally agree with you on that one. And I think if we can do that, then what happens is because you're and actually I found I hated going to the gym. But the moment when I was going to get married, I wanted to lose a little bit of weight. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get in the gym. And I made myself hire a personal trainer. The personal trainer then was there. So I had to show up. Of course, I paid him. So I had to show up. And what happened was really interesting. What I found was just the fact that I showed up. I hated doing all the gym stuff because I was a swimmer up to that point. I did yoga. Yoga, but not like I do now. Now my yoga practice is like way other levels. But in those days, it was sort of more, stretchy type of stuff. And what happened was I was on the machines, and at some point, I absolutely got addicted to it because I felt so good afterwards, and I had so much energy arise from the resistance, moving past the resistance, the apathy, the mental noise about it. And then suddenly it became this thing of like something became indispensable in my daily life, So even now I can get onto a machine. I will choose the machines I like. Don't have to do, what everybody else might enjoy. And there are some I like, some I don't. So I think that's really important. But what I have found for myself is like yoga is, there is no way. I get up at 5 a.m. to be in the class at 7:30 in the morning in central London. I don't care. I will eat 5 o'clock the evening before, just so that I can manage my sleep and all the whole routine. So it's incredible how amazing it makes you feel if you find the right mode for yourself.
Yeah, and here's the thing: you may not always want to move your body or exercise, but as you've shared, you never regret it after. You never regret it once you've done it.
You really don't. That's very, very true. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I really want to ask you is with regards to the energy element. So with regards to managing energy, Simon, there is this conversation in social media about energy vampires and all kinds of stuff like that. Now, I'm somebody who's very, very sensitive. I'm super sensitive to energy.
Yeah.
People, places. I can't often go into very crowded places because I come away feeling really zapped and so on. I haven't figured out how that kind of works in a sense. But what is your view about this business about people stealing energy? What about shielding? Does that come from a place of fear? Should you do it? What would you do if you were to shield yourself?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we only have 24 hours a day. We already have limited time. And so we do have to be conscious about how we choose to spend that time and who we spend it with. And so when I look at environment, there are two types of environments. There is that which you can control and that which you can't. So let's take the instance of the environment you can control. If you know there are people that zap you of energy, that drain your energy, that you already know ahead of time, if I spend time there, I'm going to feel like it was a waste of an evening. I'm going to come out negative, worse than I was before I went in. Then just eliminate that from your diary or do less of it. It's as simple as that. But of course, I understand there'll be parts of your environment that you cannot change. So it could be your colleagues at work. It could be some family members. You just can't change that environment you have in your life. And so what you have to do with the awareness of how they affect your energy is you want to dilute the impact of it. So if you know ahead of time that you're going to go into a conversation or go into an environment where you know you're going to come out feeling a little negative, then you can have a solution that after you come out of that, what can you listen to that will get you back into the zone that you were in? What book can you have on the dashboard of your car that you can dive into before you set foot back home? So you can start to create solutions that help dilute the impact of that moment of being in such a negative environment.
Do you put up energy shields and stuff like that for yourself ever? Is that something that works for you?
Yeah, so I'm very conscious about protecting my energy. So one of the habits my wife and I have, and she works for herself as well, is every week we block out Monday and Tuesdays. We block out Monday and Tuesdays for content creation, for catching up with some admin tasks, for just being nothing days. So we can kind of do what we need to do and we just have that space for ourselves. And so very rarely will I have meetings and other stuff booked in there. Wednesdays every other week we have as a date day. So we spend time by going out into the city. We have a lunch together. We just talk about our relationship. We talk about family. And then Wednesday afternoon, Thursday and Fridays is where we then do all the other stuff. We do the meetings. We do a lot more of what we have to get done at work. And then weekends, we spend time with our daughter.
Beautiful. Super, super nice. It's a really nice model for a lot of people, what you just described.
I think the thing is you have to be conscious about blocking out me time in your calendar. You have to decide ahead of time, what is my ideal week? What can I start blocking out ahead of time that I tell myself on my priorities? Because if you don't, there'll always be something that comes into your diary. You're not going to get it perfect every week. But if you know ahead of time what your ideal week looks like, you can benchmark your weeks. How close was I to hitting that ideal week? And you keep refining, you keep tuning things every single week based on your experience. And eventually you'll get to a week that kind of works for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simon. As I say, okay, I could carry on having this conversation. I think we'll bring it to a close with this one here today. And I really want to thank you for joining me today and for sharing your wisdom, for your experience and your time. Really
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.